Let me start by introducing our panelists. Their full bios are in the pamphlet, but to my left is Rick Estrada, the CEO of Metropolitan Family Services. Since 2011, Rick has helped grow MFS by 90% in terms of families served. It now serves more than 72,000 families a year. To his left is Mark Werner, who's Deputy Chief of the Clinical Division for Cook County Juvenile Probation and Court Services, where he's worked in various capacities since 1999. We also have Cliff Nellis, the Executive Director and founder of the Lawndale Christian Legal Center since 2009. And Grace Ho, who has been the Executive Director of the Woods Fund Chicago since 2012. Before that, she served as the Assistant Secretary at the Illinois Department of Human Services. So excited to have all of you here, excited for a great discussion. I want to just introduce this panel, which is titled The Challenge, Reaching Youth Most at Risk for Violence, by just sort of talking about which youth are we talking about. And Get In Chicago has a category that they talk about of acutely high-risk youth. And so we're talking about young people who are 13 to 18 years old, who have repeated arrests and criminal justice involvement, chronic absenteeism from school, documented mental health issues, significant histories of trauma, histories of abuse, neglect, current or previously incarcerated parents, gang involvement, right? So obviously, we know that this is a population that's hard to reach, hard to serve, and that's what we're going to be talking about in this panel. But although the panel is titled The Challenge, we're also going to try to talk about some solutions too, and hopefully our panelists can offer some ideas from their own work about how they've overcome some of the challenges of working with acutely high-risk youth. So I'm going to start with you, Rick. So Metropolitan Family Services serves as the case management provider for Get In Chicago's SYNC program. So I'm hoping you can start by telling us a little bit about the biggest roadblocks that you guys have seen in the sort of intake and service provision and service delivery for acutely high-risk youth.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Again, as you heard before, my name is Rick Estrada. A little bit about Metropolitan. We are the first charter not-for-profit in the state of Illinois, so we've been at this for a long time, for 161 years to be exact. And I think the challenges that we're facing in the outreach component here for the acutely at-risk youth are known best by the people who do the work that are sitting at the end of the room here from Metropolitan. So I think for us, the critical thing, and I haven't checked my notes with their notes, so later on they're either going to check me or they're going to say, you should have said this or you should have said that. But here's from my own perspective, because this isn't the only work that we do in outreach. And it's one, these young people have been let down many, many times before. Even though they're young folks, they've been let down by a variety of different systems, from early childhood to the after-school space, to elementary school space, and into high school space. They've been let down through those systems. We heard they've been let down or disappointed by the lack of affordable housing. They've been disappointed a bunch of times, and we won't get into all the kind of trauma and micro attacks that they've suffered over the course of their lifetime. So by the time that we now start identifying these young people who have justice-involved experiences that are truant at school, that are not at school altogether, then it becomes, as you might imagine, many of you are my colleagues and experts in the field, it's a tough proposition to even present to them. Say, come in and we're going to offer therapy. Yeah, good luck with that. We're going to offer you mentorship. Yeah, mentorship. By whom? Who's going to do it? So right from the very beginning, it's a difficult struggle to just convince the folks to open up their minds to the possibility that there is a new program built on other programs that can offer them true and legitimate services. So that's the first and the biggest challenge. And so the easiest and obvious and most general thing to say, like, oh yeah, wow, big newsflash, is that we need to work really hard at building a relationship with those young people to the point where they trust us enough, because as you know, we are the case manager. We're going to do the outreach work, but in the work that we're doing with Get in Chicago through SYNC, at the end of the day, we're going to transfer these young people over to other expert organizations, some represented in the room today, that will then actually offer the services. So even in that transfer from the intake process to the actual service, it's fraught with lots of challenges to just make sure we get it right. So those are the challenges. I think at some point we'll talk about some solutions that we're finding along the way.
You can do that now. So talk about some of the ways that you build that trust, that you ensure sort of continuity of services when you're doing that pass off to other service providers.
So, I wrote a couple of notes here, and I think what you all have to understand, and I think you'll agree with me here, is that this is no longer a pilot program for us, but it had been a pilot program for a while. And here's the difference between the nonprofit pilot programs and the corporate pilot programs. And I'll just take one example here, and it's self-driven vehicles, right? Every industry and every major company, from Groupon to Amazon to all the ones that you're not even thinking about, are working on technology to drive self-driven vehicles. And they've invested and poured millions, if not billions of dollars into this technology, and it keeps going wrong. And there's been well-documented cases of people who die and get killed along the way, either in the car or outside the car. And so there's a lot of testing that happens, and seems to be in the public's mind lots of patience to get it right. In our space, with a minuscule fraction of the dollars, we're expected to not only run a pilot project, but also get it right the first time. And there's little forgiveness for if you don't get it right, if you don't reach the number of people, if they don't go from your intake process into the arms of our excellent partners and organizations that do provide the work. There's a little tolerance for that. So I think in the things that have been happening right with Get in Chicago and its supporters and funders and SYNC and our partners is that they truly are beginning, not fully, beginning to understand that there is a real pilot process that has to happen so that we get to the point where we've learned all the issues, mistakes that were made along the way, that we build solutions, and then that we work with our partners. And along the way, so that's the easy part, along the way you're building trust so they don't feel like we're hammering them over the head because we didn't get it right the first time. And I think it starts from the funders to the coordinator, in this case, SYNC and Get In, to the intake organization, to our partners, that we're beginning to build those tolerances that come with true development of new programs. That's what I would say it's the major finding.
Great. Cliff, I want to turn to you now as someone who's built an organization from the ground up, and I'm wondering if you can talk about the biggest capacity and capability issues that your organization has faced. So capacity, staff, money, capability, skills, competencies, and how you've addressed some of those.
Sure, thank you. So when I answer this question, I look at it in the context, first of all, it's a resource question. I mean, both capacity and capabilities is really tied to resources. And when I look at resources in this particular field, which I believe is very underdeveloped, there is not a significant investment in community-based interventions for the acutely high risk, which means then, to what Rick just said, it is, there's a lot of learning, there's a lot of capacity building and capability building that's needed broadly throughout the community. And what is needed to do that is resources. So in the context of resources, I think we have to realize that where are the resources currently going and how is that working? And is it reasonable then to think that we need to shift those resources to other interventions? And that would be the criminal justice system. So when we look at the amount of money we're spending on policing, prosecuting, and incarcerating the acutely high risk, that number is staggering by any measure of the number. I mean, you're in the billions. In North Lawndale, you have 35,000 people. literally 35,000 residents. And there's numbers that we've been throwing around in the neighborhood through the hub. Rufus and Jacobs here from our hub at UCAN and BBF. And you know, we saw a statistic said there's 886 some officers out of 10th and 11th district patrolling North Lawndale. Well, when you break that down per resident, that's one officer for every 39 residents. When you multiply that based upon a salary package with, you know, a taser and a police car and gun and all the trainings, you're talking $125,000, $150,000 per officer. Multiply that by 886, you're now close to 115 million in just policing 35,000 people. And we need to do a really rigorous analysis of what that amount of money actually is. And I would like to do it particularly because our organization's in North Lawndale. North Lawndale is the community that we care most about, is how much does that break down per community? Because you get some compelling figures when you do all that for 35,000 people. So, and that's just policing, right? And so you gotta do prosecution, which would be every arm of the court, public defender's office, state's attorney's office, judiciary, court reporter, clerk, et cetera. How many cases are coming out of North Lawndale? Then you gotta look at Cook County Jail, you gotta look at IDOC, and then you gotta do the whole thing all over again for federal. That's just to say, what are the challenges that we've come to around capacity and capability building? The challenges that our country, although it's changing, and it is becoming more bipartisan right now, the main challenge is we like to spend billions of dollars on policing, prosecuting, and incarcerating black communities. And let's be honest, where that money's going and who it's going toward. For a fraction of the cost, I mean, I like to think, you know, we could do magic with $100 million, right, Rufus? If the hub and if all the agencies, it's not about the hub, but if all the agencies in North Lawndale, if we had $100 million to put towards after-school programs, extracurricular activities, and building capacity to intervene in the lives of those most at risk on our corners, we could do magic. We can beat the current recidivism rates and work that our criminal justice system is doing. It's not saying a lot, it's a low bar. I mean, our most common intervention in our criminal justice system is permanent records as early as 15, 16, and 17 years old, which is frankly ridiculous. It's ridiculous at any age, permanent records, and incarceration. And neither of which show any outcome that is successful. I mean, this is not working, and we spend a lot of money on it. So, what challenge have we found? We've got to convince people that resourcing the North Lawndale community, providing trainings to do the work that the community wants to do. I mean, the community loves the community more than anybody. They live there. This is their neighbor. These are cousins, family members. They want to do this work, but they need the resources to do it. And I think we need to start believing that people in North Lawndale and across the city of Chicago and other neighborhoods as well are far better equipped to intervene in this acutely high-risk lives than police, prosecutors, and jails.
Mark, I want to bring you in here as someone who is inside the criminal justice system in the probation department. What do you see as some of the challenges that the criminal justice system poses to violence prevention work, and what are some of the ways that the system itself could change in order to really do the work of violence prevention better?
Thank you. So, number one, first of all, I think we're already on that road to change. I think there's been tons of progress made in the juvenile justice field, particularly in Cook County, and we're striving to do better every day. So, as I was listening to everybody talking, I'm like, how do we figure this out? Who is the most at risk for violence? How do we even know that answer? We have to start with a comprehensive assessment on the front end. And we need to do our intake, including a valid standardized youth risk assessment. Illinois currently uses the YASI, or the Youth Assessment Screening Instrument. However, we're converting over to the Ohio Youth Assessment Screening Tools. Both adult and juvenile are doing this, and that's through the University of Cincinnati. So that's a new thing that will be in place by the end of the year. But using that, you should be able to figure out which kids are at the most risk to commit a violent crime. And then we need to concentrate on those. If a kid is scoring low risk, we shouldn't be touching those youth. Either we shouldn't be servicing them at all, but if a judge orders them on supervision or probation, then we need to be referring them out to a community-based agency to service them, somewhere in their community where they can really receive the services they still need, but we would have a very light touch. The medium and high risk should be the ones that probation is concentrating on, with the really high dosage going to the high risk. We have to involve the youth in the case planning. Probation orders themselves should be very limited. It should be concentrating on protecting the public, but the actual case plan that is developed with the youth and the family, that should be what the probation officer is concentrating on. And we should be doing that using their risk and needs identified, and then we help them develop a very limited list of things that they can do to help. These are not easy youth to work with. They don't willingly want to do anything. They're not compliant. But that's why they pay us to do what we do. That's the reason we have to go out there. We have to motivate them. We have to use our skills to encourage them. We have to allow them the ability to focus on change. We need to identify their support network. And I think this is a really good place for us to improve because probation officers love to work with the kids, but they don't necessarily like to work with those families. I talked about the youth not being easy to work with. The families are sometimes a lot harder than the youth to work with. So we need to identify those support people that are really helping those youth who can serve as good role models and hopefully their family. But sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're neighbors or coaches or teachers or community agencies near their house that can serve as the support network. I don't know any of us that would have been able to succeed in life without having some support from somebody. And I think we forget that sometimes. I still use my family as resources sometimes when you're struggling with something, or my friends. And a lot of the time these youth don't have anybody that they can go to. So helping them identify those people and use those people are going to help them. We're in their life for a really short period of time. And that's the way it should be. The probation officers that I work with, they serve as mentors and friends, and they involve them in positive activities that, in the community. But it's still a brief amount of time. And so they need to have that ongoing support after we're done with them. The barriers that Rick spoke about, we need to make sure that they can get to where they need to go. If we're identifying counseling as one of their needs, how do they get there? Do they have to cross 3 gang territories in order to get to a community-based agency that serves them? That's a problem. So trying to help them figure out the transportation needs is always a good thing. We are a community-based probation department. We go to them. We don't have them come to the office. And I think that that's one of the reasons we succeed a lot with the kids. I had a community agency that came to me a long time ago, and they were really struggling with attendance for the youth that they were seeing for counseling. And they asked, why are we having this problem? You know, we see them every week. But when we kind of told them what we did to go see them, we got people out there pounding the pavement, and that's how they are successful. Going to the office is not necessarily the way they want to do things. So, and just going back to our assessment on the front end, I wanted to also say, you know, having that structured decision-making on the front end, it promotes fairness, it promotes equity. It doesn't matter which probation officer you get. It shouldn't matter which probation officer you get. If you're making structured decisions, you're going to get the same decision no matter what. And we think that that's extremely important too. You're always going to have different personalities, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but we have to have fairness too.
Grace, I want to turn to you. Woods Fund, I know, focuses its grant making in the areas of public policy advocacy and community organizing. And so I'm hoping you can talk about the sort of policy and systemic barriers to violence prevention work and how we might start to overcome those.
Thanks, Jonah. Good morning, everyone. So my comments are going to pivot away from how do we best serve acutely high-risk youth to why there are acutely high-risk youth. And as I was listening to Ben's comments earlier, one of the phrases that he talked about as it relates to the state of public housing and the violence in them previously are that the numbers are harrowing and numbing, right? And so I think numbing in that our society and our public sector in some ways has accepted that this is the normal, and so we are going to take our time to figure out how to address those issues. But as I think about, as Jonah kind of described the definition of acutely high-risk youth, I began to think about what are the reasons for our failure of these young people, as Rick said earlier, and I believe that they're acutely high risk because we failed them. Society failed them. The systems that we have in place created the inevitable, in many situations, path for these young people. To further riff off Ben's description of the repairs and painting over the walls of public housing buildings, are we painting over the walls of the problems of violence, right? And can we solve the problems truly underneath those walls? And so, as Jonah described, we at Woods Fund, we fund community organizing and public policy advocacy, and we have some colleague funders in the room. I think as it relates to not necessarily specific policies, but one challenge within the arena of policy and change is that there's not enough funding and support for organizations who are actually trying to strip the paint off the walls and figure out what lies beneath the foundation. So Cliff, we'd like some of that $100 million. To give to organizations, to community-based organizations who are doing work in their own backyard, who are leading training and putting the power back in the hands of those who are the acutely high risk, who are the parents of the acutely high risk, who live next door to the acutely high risk, who are attending schools with police officers, with metal detectors, with the fear of being incarcerated in their place of education, where they have to be handed off through adults through safe passages to get to school, where their schools are being shut down without their notice or consent, where we are over-investing in jails and prisons when they could, we know, be invested in better ways. So if we reflect on this problem in the context of our own lives, right, where we live, if our schools were being closed, if our young people were deemed acutely high risk, would we want to be a part of the solution, right? Would we want paint on those solutions, or would we want it to be solved? And I would say that that's where we need to direct more attention. So it's the services and figuring out how we address the policies and the laws that perpetually create the need for these services. And so for me, as I was thinking about the grantee community in our portfolio that addresses these issues, you have community-based organizations that are working with policy organizations to, I think one of the key policies that there's been incremental change is actually treating young people like young people, right? So the data is abundant. Truth is the truth, is that young people peak as it relates to the bad decisions we make and we have made over time when we are in this hot time. But how do we, as a society, adjust and reflect that truth and have our policies also indicate that and address that. Instead of locking them up, how do we truly address the needs? And so there are other countries that have increased the age, right, where young people can be treated as young people. I think the second issue that Woods has really embarked on a journey of learning over the past 10 years is our structurally racist policies. Black young men are not predisposed to violence any more than my kids. And so the disproportionality is not acceptable, and again, it's something that we as a society have created. Policies are created by men and women, right? And they have to be undone by men and women. And so not only looking at policies moving forward, but the historical policies and structurally racist intentional segregation of people in this city to create the conditions that we're in. So I see the big challenge as being to balance how do we kind of deconstruct and create alternative systems for adjudication and repairing the harm, as LCLC is trying to do with its partners as it relates to the Restorative Justice Court, like a different court, a different system, because we know that the current system is failing, and balancing it with meeting the immediate needs of the acutely high risk. I think those are the challenges.
Thanks. And anyone can feel free to jump in. I want this to be a vibrant discussion if anyone has any additional thoughts.
Let me piggyback on Grace's comments there, because I think it's important to understand that some of the things that she said, I know that many of you are experts in this field as well, but if you look at this popular book called The City of Scoundrels, and it talks about how the Chicago machine was created in the period around 1919, and how the Great Migration was happening around the same time, and how this city, by design, planned to move people to certain parts, on the south side primarily, and later on the west side. It was by design. We haven't developed yet a plan to counteract that plan that was developed in 1919. And if, again, I just want you to read for yourself, and then read more about that time period, because we need to do something about changing that. But my final comments around this area is that, the challenges to creating a system to empower young people to live full lives are really set by us in this room and our colleagues out in the field. Let me explain what I mean by that. I've been talking about this for about a decade now, and I'm going to keep talking about this because I think it's critical. I call it the kind of nonprofit gangbanger syndrome, that nonprofits themselves kind of protect turf viciously and act viciously against each other. They jealously guard resources, hold grudges, hoard, resources, etc. And so a challenge to creating a system when you have elements within our space, the human empowerment space, that act this way, counteract all the goodwill that we've been doing. So I think one of the last questions you want to ask us is, so what are promising practices out in the field? And certainly there are a ton of promising practices. The Get in Chicago for sure, and Thrive Chicago, and Ready Chicago, and Communities Partnering for Peace, and your individual efforts, whether it's Youth Outreach Services or HAAS, and I can name a bunch of people here today. There are lots of promising examples, but if we don't deal with this kind of issue in our sector, and it's not, we don't own it ourselves, it happens in other sectors, but this kind of nonprofit gangbanger mentality that prevents us from fully capitalizing on our combined and collective resources to empower young people, then we have to point our finger at ourselves as the reason why we can't build a system that works. If you look around the room, there are some of the organizations that I mentioned are not here today, and they're legitimately busy with other important work, but if we're going to build a system that works, we have to be in the same room together more often to kind of collect these connect these efforts in a systematic way, again, because our youth deserve it. And I think there are promising examples there that are going on today. And the final thing is that this partnership, true partnership that puts the turf aside and all the jealousy aside, it's the most difficult thing to do. It's a lot easier to go top down and just order people to do things than it is to create true partnership. And it's messy and it's hard and it's painful, but at the end of the day, it's the only thing that's going to help us, empower young people.
I think, and if I just could jump in real quick, I think, Rick, having spent time in the nonprofit sector as well on the grant seeking side, I think it's a question for philanthropy too, and how do we feed into this competitive state that we have created. Recently I've been thinking a lot about the grant-making industrial complex that we in philanthropy have created. And even when we create new private foundations, we tend to kind of go down the usual path, assembly line path of a letter of intent and an RFP and site visits, and we do that, so we're guilty of it. But I think we need to be challenged too within philanthropy to think about how are we perpetuating, isolation of work. How can we provide the due diligence and be good stewards of the funds that we are in care of, but also making sure that we are promoting and trying to catalyzing true change. So I think that that's a challenge that we need to reflect on too within the world of philanthropy.
That's great. I want to bring in Mark and Cliff, because the young people that both of your organizations, agencies work with are being touched and served by many different systems, agencies, institutions, right? There's probation and the courts and lawyers and social workers and therapists and, right, so schools, right? We've got all these different systems. What are the barriers that you guys see to, getting those systems to really work together and creating a coordinated system of care, and how do you overcome some of those barriers on the kind of front lines, if you will?
So, well, let me back it up one layer, because I feel like part of getting to that outcome starts in the community and forming local collaborations that are trying to be community-led, where there's community leadership at the table, respected community members at the table who do good work in the neighborhood, who love the neighborhood, who are from the neighborhood. And forming those collaborations, I think, is critical to the ultimate then right relationship with systems. Because frankly, I don't know a system that doesn't just run over North Lawndale in any way, shape, or form, makes decisions for it, thinks it knows better than it, will decide how to spend money, decide what to do. And I don't think there's a system that I can think of that doesn't do that. So we at the Legal Center feel that our work is justice work. Our work is not charity, it's not, it's direct service, but it's not really direct service. That to do this work well, we have to be working as a community. And we have to resource the community. We have to build capacity in the community to do this work, to take our kids back, to not allow them to go into the system. That's a lot of work. It's not easy. So in North Lawndale, though, we did start about 4 years ago, this North Lawndale Community Restorative Justice Hub. There's another collaboration that's showing a lot of success, is the NLCCC, North Lawndale Community Coordinating Council, CCC. Where you have, and so for the hub, we intentionally started without money. We didn't start around an RFP, we didn't start around a grant, we started around relationships, values, and vision. Because there had been, I couldn't echo what Grace said more. The divide and conquer of community and the divide and conquer of nonprofits doesn't happen because of nonprofits or the community. That happens because of outside influences on the community that force it. The community doesn't want it. So rather than form around a grant, rather than form around money, whatever convenes you leaves, the convening ends. And so a number of us were at the table together for years and around outside plans and outside influence and outside RFPs, and we're like, this is garbage. Didn't take too long to figure that out. So we said we want to come together and actually be the architect of what we think is better for the neighborhood, because we're here. Like, there are people that live here that know the ins and outs of North Lawndale, who's who, what's what, what's hot, what's not. Where are the assets, where are the strengths, where are the weaknesses. Those are the people that need to be resourced to get out of this. So, And then once you have that sort of collaboration and that shared values and shared relationship and vision, I think now you have something that could, and we're not quite there yet, I think, but we're getting there. That's where now you can start to have some meaningful collaboration with community, where community then can actually partner in more of a right relationship with all the different systems that affect North Lawndale, but really demand, frankly, that community voice be guiding those public policies, those public decisions, those systems that are serving and impacting North Lawndale residents, but have token at best community voice. I went in and I did a focus group with 10 people with my idea, and they rubber stamped it. I'm sorry, that's not, you don't get to say you consulted community, you don't get to say it's community led. They need to be at the table making decisions every step of the way. That's true collaboration. Do I think that happens a lot? No, not really. I mean, I think systems, particularly in black communities, we're talking about intentionally marginalized communities where voice is not respected. The presumption is everybody else in the room is the expert other than the people there. I mean, that's the inherent presumption. You walk in and that's the assumption behind everything. So I don't know if I answered your question, and I'm going to wrap it up because I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but the barriers to authentic collaboration with systems frankly, it seems like it is just a barrier. It's hard. I don't know, I'm just going to say there's a lot of work to be done. How about that?
Mark?
So Cliff brought up a lot of great points. Violence is not something that I think we can arrest our way out of, adjudicate our way out of. We need to involve the communities as a system to make sure that everybody's engaged and we're coming up with solutions together. With that being said, coordinating across systems is really hard work, and I think Rick said that it's extremely easy to work in silos, and that's what we've been doing. And our policies and our laws have been set up that way. We have so many laws protecting confidentiality. It's so easy to say, because of this, I can't share information with you. We got HIPAA, we got the Juvenile Court Act, we have mental health code, we have school code, and all of them are misread, misinterpreted, and so we've been striving a lot to make sure that we're doing good information sharing, and this is a struggle, and we have multiple meetings about it. Hours and hours of my time that I will never get back. But we've made some significant progress too. So at the line level, we have people with different schedules. We have people with personality conflicts. Again, easy to work in silos, easy to do the work yourself and think that you're doing a good job, but you're really not communicating with the people that know. I'm a nuts and bolts guy. I want to really make progress on working on those MOUs to make sure that we're sharing information, that we're developing policies and processes that structure good information sharing, scheduling regular staffings so that we force that's a bad word. Okay, I'm going to use it anyway. Force people to get together and talk about the kids that they're servicing, making sure those staffings are happening, developing IT-related solutions so that, that we kind of structure those too. There's a lot of progress being made on the IT front, and I think that that's an area that we're going to see some growth into so that we can share better. Thanks.
I want to bring in one more challenge that we haven't talked about yet, which is burnout. This is really difficult work, especially for those who are every day in and out working with young people. And so for those of you who do direct service work, if you can talk about some of the ways that you help your staff avoid burnout, cynicism, and some of the challenges that go along with the difficulty of the work.
I'm probably a bad boss. So I'll start with the bad boss part. when people tell me about burnout by responses, we can't be overwhelmed. The people that we are working with who have a lack of all these resources, they're overwhelmed. So it can't be us, right? And so that's the bad boss part of it. The slightly better boss part of it is that I was on the south side in Roseland at one of our Calumet Center's meetings, and they're just amazing people. They put on these, each program in the organization puts on a skit to kind of talk about their work, and you should have seen the Sync skit that they put together. There's a little video of it, but I mean, they are walking around. One guy was wearing a cape like a superhero, and they just have a ton of fun and kind of make a little bit of fun of each other and the work that we're doing, all the while acknowledging their role as superheroes in trying to get the toughest to find youth to take on a service they really don't want, but know they need. And so we try to keep it fun, we try to keep it light, and at the same time knowing that it's intense work.
So I'll start by saying I don't think we have this licked, personally or at the Legal Center. I'm already tearing up. This is hard work. Recently, one of my lawyers is leaving. In her 5 years, we've lost 11 kids that she represented. We do community-based lawyering. We're in the neighborhood. I live in the neighborhood. It's different. I mean, it's just not a client. It's my neighbor. It's somebody I've gotten to know well. Sometimes it's a godson or whatnot. And so it is tough. It is very tough. I will say this, I will say two things. I would say one is personally faith that helps me. Second thing, I think, is knowing that this is civil rights work. And this is why we, started with this hub. This is why we believe in collaboration, and is because at the end of the day, if you're not arm in arm with somebody, think of the burnout and the challenges of the civil rights movement. I mean, come on, that had to be incredibly disheartening. So if you're not arm in arm, you're not going to make it. So understanding that we are up against centuries of racism and systemic injustice, I think, is part of understanding what you're going into. And then from a policy perspective, I've started to look at two other professions. Again, going back to this is sort of an underdeveloped field. Just thinking, I was literally in a meeting like a month ago where I found out one of our kids was killed. And I'm sitting there like half the time focusing on this meeting and half the time crying. And the people that I was meeting with were like, do you want to cancel this meeting? Any reasonable, normal, good human being would have said yes. What did I say? No, let's keep going. And so I'm looking at other professions, like medical doctors, professions who lose people for a living. And hospitals have like built-in policies. If you lose somebody on the table, you go home. Another doctor comes in, informs the family. You see a psychologist before you're allowed to come back to work. So we have created a secondary trauma and a bereavement policy where we're implementing these things. It's a little late, to be honest. We're, 9 years into this work. I wish that we had some of these things in place before. I don't even know if that'll be enough. I mean, honestly, this is just hard work. So I go back to you've got to know what you're getting into. You've got to wake up every day and know that you're battling something that likely is, we're losing more than winning, but it's the fight that has to continue to happen. And that literally is what keeps me in it, and hopefully will for the rest of my life until it's fixed or die trying.
Mark, I'd love your thoughts too. And I know there's a lot of probation officers like yourself who've been in the work a very long time, and so just sort of would love for you to talk about, burnout might not mean leaving the work altogether. It might mean becoming cynical or disillusioned, and sort of how do you avoid that among frontline probation officers?
And I'll go really quick. I won't repeat everything Cliff just said, but I agree 100%. This is really tough work. We lose a lot of clients, unfortunately. We're dealing with a high-risk population, and I don't remember the exact amount last year, but it was significant. We've had probation officers individually lose at least 10 clients by themselves, and that's not even including the other people who are in their unit. So it's tough. What we established a few years ago was a notification team. Usually you found out by happenstance. You'd go to the house to visit them and the parent would tell you, or the parent would call you on the phone. It was very just kind of loosey-goosey. So we now have a notification team. When we find out about a death or a shooting, we find out through Chicago Police Department through a protocol, and we notify them. We have some of our trained supervisors and deputy chiefs go to the person and talk to them, tell them what happened, give them the circumstances, let them grieve. We allow them to go home if they need to go home. We allow them to attend the wake or the funeral if they want to. So that's kind of some of the ways we do it, but self-care is so important. I know that we've had some peace circles around this where staff was invited to attend also, and I think that's helped out a lot where people can share their stories about losing clients. So that's just some of the ways we've done it.
Oh, we're on it. Can I add one thing that I think is really important to this issue? Part of that burnout and I think hardness that happens is because we succumb to dehumanization. I mean, at the end of the day, and our criminal justice system is like the worst at this. I mean, it's just so dehumanizing. It's just unbelievable. But even the little example I just gave you of like I'm in a meeting, I find out a young person that I know and care about is dead. And I go on with a meeting. That's dehumanizing. It's not honoring his life. That wasn't a good decision, right? But we do so much in our society that dehumanizes. I mean, even when I don't even like the violence prevention conversation. I think it's framed all wrong because you focus on the violence and all you want to do is hire more police and you think it's just put people in cages is the right answer. That's dehumanizing. They aren't violent people. Grace, okay, I'm going way off here, but you know, we have to humanize. These are young people. These are young people, and they're good people, and they're sons and daughters and cousins and brothers, and you would love them if you got to know them. I mean, they're just people, and we got to treat them like people, and we can't ever forget that too, because otherwise we'll start to motor over emotion, guilty, and not process what we need to process to maintain humanity.
Can I say something for 30 seconds?
Yes, please.
It's going to sound completely dehumanizing, which is, you know, as a funder, we look at a lot of 990s when we're doing due diligence reviews, et cetera. We don't pay staff enough, period. And you can't, you know, pay to mend someone's broken heart and to promote self-care, but if you can pay a wage that they are able to take care of their own family, I think that is a significant positive step towards being able to have a really strong workforce on the front line. We depend on a very paltry salary, and we depend on their heart and their hope for the work to actually fill in the rest. And I don't know that's enough to sustain what we're trying to do here.
So I do want to leave enough time for questions. Oh, we're done already. Oh, perfect. Well, so I just want to ask one more, and if you guys can sort of 20 or 30 seconds each, but to end on a more sort of hopeful note, what are some of the solutions that you have each seen in your own work, the ways to overcome the challenges that we've been discussing? Give us, a couple of small things that you think are really promising that have worked.
Cliff was part of the creation of this, but we have recently built this Metropolitan Peace Academy where we're training outreach workers from across the city and putting aside the individual flags and turf and coming together as one citywide unit to do outreach work. That is a really promising practice. Final thing is we're going to solve this the peace or lack of peace issue in the city because people are beginning to come together. So that's our practice.
Thanks. First of all, I wanted to say one of the great promising solutions that's really made a lot of progress is the changes by the Illinois legislature and raise the age. So also the drastic reduction they made in automatic transfers. I think that's really, really a good move forward. So for Illinois. So with that being said, there's also a ton of great evidence-based practice out there. I endorse evidence-based practice, MST, CBT, Thinking for Change, Target, Sparks are all great programs, and there's a place for them. And I don't want anybody to walk away thinking I don't endorse evidence-based practice, but also it's about instilling hope in kids. And I think so many of our kids lack hope. So what I said before about helping them establish connections in the community, within their family, I think goes a long way towards helping them have that hope in being a successful adult. So
I think I would end on the hopeful note of there is currently a massive investment across the city happening, mostly from private philanthropy in a number of these areas. Communities Partnering for Peace, Ready, of course, CRED is in town doing very similar work with Ready and CP4P. I think that the hub that we have in North Lawndale and the collaboration on the ground, all of this should, and there's evaluations being done of a lot of this work that should be able to demonstrate, hopefully in a few years' time, that community-based interventions is more effective and cheaper than criminal justice. I feel like that's probably already been proven, to be honest, but you know, I'm hoping that we can seize on this investment, capture some data, and then really build a coalition across the city to really champion some very meaningful disinvestment of the criminal justice system, not lip service. I'm talking a massive shift of resources going from a system that harms and oppresses to community-based interventions that will lift and heal. So, but I am hopeful. I am hopeful that we can do this. I am hopeful that we can do that, and I welcome all of you to be a part of it because we will try. And so there will be, and all of us here are part of this work on some way or fashion, but we need to build stronger coalitions to do that. We need a much stronger attack on disinvesting this system and investing community.
So within the context of philanthropy, and I think it was talked about before, there is this effort afoot called the Partnership for Safe and Peaceful Communities, and as I look around the room, there's some colleagues who are actually part of that effort. The Trust, McCormick, Baum, Get in Chicago has been at the table as well. And while that effort has been, I think, maybe de-siloizing a little bit our own kind of ways that we do grant making and our priorities, we have come together to try to figure out how we can figure out the puzzle of resources on the back end so that folks on the ground can do the work that they need to do. It's a work in progress, and I think that we're learning together as a result. What I think the other piece that gives me great hope as a part of that is that policy change is a part of that array of kind of funding solutions. And so Baum, in particular, and McCormick Foundation have been partners in funding the Grassroots Alliance for Police Accountability. We haven't talked a lot about the challenges, the grave, deathly challenges that we have here as it relates to law enforcement on the ground. And again, the Grassroots Alliance for Police Accountability, it's a group of community organizations that have come together to define what they think the solutions are themselves and have in fact progressed to the point where they have an ordinance that's introduced at the city council, and they are working with their own communities to figure out how changes can happen. So the last thing I'll say about community involvement is as it relates to law enforcement and police accountability. If you look at the Police Accountability Task Force report, that was also philanthropically funded. The biggest gap that existed is the legitimacy of the institutions that are supposed to be protecting communities, and that it's not what's being built, it's that synapse, that very big gap that is lost. So, and I actually have copies of GAPA's report here if anyone wants copies. It's also online. So thanks.
Great. So I hope you still have a couple of minutes for questions. I don't want to be the person responsible for pushing all of this behind schedule. So I think there are microphones going around if anyone want to raise your hand.
Your name and
My name's Patricia Gypsiaco, and I'm with My Rebuilt Life, which is a website for returning citizens. My question to you is I recently had this verified by Judge Sheehan at the Restorative Justice Court that about 90 to 92% of all arrests nationwide, and this is supported by FBI crime statistics, occur for simple drug possession and for nonviolent crimes. And that seems to me like a lot of people getting caught up in adjudication that may not actually be a risk to society. So I just wondered if any of you on the panel had a thought about that.
Agreed. I mean, we are over-policing, prosecuting, and incarcerating predominant black communities for nonviolent crimes. I grew up in a white neighborhood, and we did not get policed, prosecuted, or incarcerated at all in the same way for nonviolent offenses, which were rampant, drug offenses, which were rampant. So yeah.
So I'm Amy Campanelli. I'm the public defender for Cook County. Thank you, all of you, for the amazing work. I'm working very closely, obviously, with Cliff on a couple different projects and with Get In Chicago, specifically looking at my clients who are treated in the criminal court system. I don't call it a justice system. I will when it's just. Their normal way, without the social service wraparound, taking care of the case, getting probation, going to the penitentiary, versus if we did more holistic defense like what Cliff does at the Lawndale Christian Legal Center. And we're gonna look at that data and we're gonna study clients who have been treated like Lawndale Christian, and then clients of mine who don't necessarily get the services they need. We're gonna look at the data we're collected, and then we're gonna do some really powerful work with that data, because we know what it's gonna show, right? We know that the outcomes are better when you aren't just putting someone on probation and making them report to a probation officer in their office, not in the community like Mark was talking about, and you don't watch them and you don't give them services. They're gonna fail. And they're gonna violate probation, and then they're gonna go to the penitentiary. And when they get out of the penitentiary and they don't read your website and they don't know about you, then they're gonna reoffend and go back to the penitentiary. So there's some good work that we're collaborating on, the systems and people not in the system, like our Restorative Justice Community Court, which we're working on. We're having some issues, but Cliff is right about the community. And the fact of these low-level crimes, yes, there's lots of low-level crimes, and there's a system that's already in place to deal with our youth who come and get arrested, and it's called the JISC, and it's called the Juvenile Intervention Support Center. And we're not doing the right things with the JISC. I don't know if there's any law enforcement here in the room, and you can see on my thing I put troublemaker, okay? I should have put change maker too, but I'm a troublemaker, and that's what the public defender should be, right? I'm done with what we've been doing for 40 years. It's not worked, we all know that. But we have this center where all youth who are arrested are supposed to go to this center. And what it's supposed to be is run by social services. And you're supposed to look at the youth and assess the youth at this center and then keep them away from the court system. But we don't do that because it's run by law enforcement. It was modeled after Miami-Dade. We're not doing what we're supposed to do there. So guess what? I'm getting all these kids at the juvenile center. And then they have to get the Yazzie assessment by Mark. But they shouldn't have to go to the criminal court system to get evaluated. We should be doing it to keep them out of the court system. And I just want to say one thing. Yesterday I had to speak to the budget. I had to speak to the 17 commissioners and President Prenkwinkle and tell them, what I need in my budget. And the main thing I said was, I don't want 700 staff in my office. Success to me, the public defender, is I don't need 500 lawyers. I need 200, 300 lawyers. Because that would mean we're solving the problems in the communities that we serve. It would mean we're out in the community, we're stopping crime, we're looking at cases differently. They don't have to be solved by coming in front of a judge. So as long as people like me and Kim Fox are talking about these things, that we want less prosecution, less defendants, less felony records, less juveniles, raise the age more, things are gonna change. We can do it together. And a lot of us in the system side realize that community has the power. And the community, the clients I serve are the community. right? So we can make some great changes that way, and I think we're starting.
Marco Hakame from Healthcare Alternative Systems. I just want to make a comment regarding burnout issue that Grace brought up. I've been in the field for a long time, and the issue is the salaries of inadequate in terms of paid personnel. One of the most difficult times that we have at Haas is to hire qualified people with the amount of money that we pay. Other fields are high pay. We went 6 years of college, credentialing, and we still not be able to compete with other institutions, even bigger institutions. So is a message for the state funding and foundations to understand that we wanted hire the best people who can work in the communities, and how difficult it is for us to be able to pay them well, because they deserve to get paid well. So I just want to, that's one of the issues that people leaving the field, literally leaving the field, not moving from place to place, but leaving the field, and it's been very difficult for us as systems, and that will help to hire personnel who qualify and understanding communities. Thank you.
We have a question over here.
My name is Zeke, and I'm going to tell you who I work for. But I think self-care and burnout is so very important, and I think today we minimized a little bit. I think that the work that we do is extremely difficult, and it takes a toll on you. And vicarious trauma is true, it exists. And so we have to be mindful and ensure that we take care of ourselves and that we take care of our employees. Have some Play-Doh in your office. Have a hula hoop in your office. Have bubbles in your office where they can go away in their mind for a little while to forget about that kid on their caseload that's either back in jail or dead, or the kid is run away again. So we can't minimize that. We must emphasize improved salaries, of course, but self-care. We can do that with little things. My name is Vicki Jones. I work for the Department of Children and Family Services.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, so much. This was a wonderful panel. Thanks to all our panelists, and thanks for all your thoughtful comments and questions.